Welcome to What Do You Want to Do? The show that will hopefully help you figure out what you want to do in life or reconnect you to what you love doing. Each show has a guest who is doing what they love to do, whether it's in their career or in addition to their regular job. Most importantly, we want to help you realize that no matter your age, you too can do what you want to do if you have the will to do it. Now here's your host, Leonard Kaplan.
This week on What Do You Want to Do, our special guest is creative director, activist, and author Paul Stephen Stone. Mr. Stone is most well known for being the creative force behind the Who But W.B. Mason advertising campaign. But that's not all. His latest novel is called Sojourner, which can be found on Fahrenheit Press as well as Amazon.com. And now, let's find out how Paul Stephen Stone came to do what he wants to do. This week, a special guest from my past once again, Paul Stephen Stone. And I remember when we last saw each other, we were in a little restaurant in Central Square.
Carberry's.
Carberry's, yes. You were winding down a very successful career. Paul Stephen Stone is the inventor of the saying, "Who but W.B. Mason?"
Mm-hmm.
And did you design the logo as well?
I was a creative director, and what I did was I went out for whatever reason, I felt impelled to go out to a library and get a book of old circus posters. And out of that came the whole campaign. I was directing an art director, Bill Dahlgren by name, and we worked closely to just create it.
So this show features two kinds of people who make their living in the arts, doing what they were born to do, and people who do it on the side, and some people who are in the middle or somehow could never do that, but still have that dream somewhere. And the purpose of the show is to revive the dreams or keep the dreams alive of people who really want to be fulfilled in their career and they're not just in it for the money. And you have succeeded by all counts at making a living at your dream. And now you've gone beyond that. You are an author now in an officially published book. And I'd love you to tell us about it.
Well, the book is called Sojourner. It's a novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I coined that term, Sojourner, which basically applies to an incarnation in life. So in other words, if you think of a soul as having a variety of incarnations, once that soul is incarnated, at that point, he or she is a sojourner.
Oh,
does that make sense?
Yes.
And this is my second novel and my third book. I had self-published a novel called Or So It Seems. And I had been a newspaper columnist for a chain of papers on the South Shore years ago called the Mariner Group. And I did that over 25 years, basically stopping and starting as the tank went dry and filled up again. And so I put a collection of those together, and it's called How to Train a Rock. one of my columns.
Very interesting. Now, can you back up a bit and tell us how you got into the career that you had been in all these years and how possibly your career relates to your two novels?
Let me give you what I see as a global view of my career.
All right.
Since I was probably in my late teens, I felt drawn to being a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I actually even understood I was going to be a writer when I went to school and took up advertising. I think at that point, it hadn't crystallized clearly enough for me to say, okay, I'm going to be a writer, I'll be a copywriter. Mm-hmm. But once I got into the advertising business, I just sort of naturally fell into that particular channel. There was a point in my writing where I think I discovered that this was my calling. And there were a number of times when I saw myself being kind of pushed further away from it by circumstance. Mm-hmm. And I always did writing on my own once I had felt that I was in that niche, but I didn't necessarily make a living at it until I had basically hit the skids. I was a married man with a couple of kids, and basically lost. I was working as a freelancer writing stories and lessons for reading programs. Proposition 13 in California basically killed all the jobs that I had lined up, and suddenly I had to decide what to do with my life because I could not find work. And I decided I put my toe in the water at advertising it, but I didn't like it. I was a hack copywriter, and I didn't enjoy being a hack copywriter, but I worked at a hack advertising agency, and it just sort of naturally happened. This next iteration, I discovered that I had a set of standards that I hadn't discovered in my previous stint in advertising, and they were all related to being creative. And I suddenly started to have disputes with the people that were supervising me because they didn't want to spend the money and time to be creative. They just wanted to give me a headline. These are recruitment ads. Nobody's going to care one way or the other.
Right.
So at that point, that's when I first started to fight to really be allowed to express myself, and I think my calling. And once I started to do that, the calling became a lot stronger, I think. Very quickly, I gravitated to a general purpose agency that was still not a great one, and then eventually to a major Boston agency where my creativity, there's a piece I wrote about the development of the Who But W.B. Mason brand, and I talk about the fact that for 6 months I was in this agency where they were undergoing so much trouble and loss of sense of self. They had lost 2 big accounts and it totally put them into a tailspin. So they brought in people to supervise the creatives and really created a situation where I couldn't get any creative work out of the agency for 6 months. I left there and I went to a startup in the South Shore, and my creative impulse, which had been kept down so long, was like a spring that had been, kept down, and it just absolutely exploded. And this agency, in a short amount of time, became a very successful creative shop. And that's when I created the Who But W.B. Mason brand, and a number of other, I think, fairly creative pieces. I had no idea at that point that I would be writing a novel, or I think I already started to do the columns, but they weren't as creative as they would be. There's a difficulty in trying to put everything into a timeline for me, because a lot of the stuff was like popcorn popping in a popcorn popper. But clearly my standards in the advertising work that I did put me at a certain level with my writing. And then at some point I decided that I wanted to write a novel, and it took me 12 years to write it. And it was pretty much powered by, as these things are, by tragedy, by the divorce that I had, that I didn't really ever appreciate my wife helping me to discover. So I think there's something that special that happens when you get the friction of a life experience that really rubs you the wrong way, seemingly, but you need to respond to it. And writing, Or So It Seems, which is the novel's name, really allowed something special to happen within me. It took 12 years to write, and I self-published, and soon thereafter, I put together that book of 50 newspaper columns, the best work that I think I had done in doing those columns. And I knew at that point, and don't ask me how I knew, that I had at least 2 more books that I have to write, 2 more novels. And I've written one of them, and I've got, the sequel is waiting to be written. And I think once the election finishes, my blog I can let go, and I can start to focus on other projects. I also found that I couldn't finish the second novel until I stopped working on my blog 4 years ago. So there's only so much in the tank, and where you go and how I'm reacting to my calling, I don't even think about it. I think there's a way in which the universe, if you allow the universe to rise up to meet you on the road, you'll find the rest of the road waiting for you. That's my experience.
Now, did you get out of the ad business because you retired, or did you suddenly say, I've had it, I've got to write my book?
I was partner in an ad agency in Cambridge.
So it was you.
And at that point, I had already started, one of the things that I discovered, Leonard, is that when you allow things to happen, they happen all over the place. I became advertising director for Jill Stein's ill-fated campaign for governor as a Green candidate. I got very involved with the organization serving mentally retarded or developmentally disabled adults on the South Shore. I had a lot of things that I was putting my talent towards, and generally with the same level of creativity. The advertising agency, basically we sold it, and we had a contract to keep working there, for 3 years, as these things often involve. And after 3 months after we sold it, the company that bought us, went against their own bank covenants, and they basically changed the nature of our contract. And as soon as that happened, I said to myself, well, I don't have to honor my agreement to stay here 3 years. And I made a new agreement with them that I would work on the W.B. Mason account, which is basically why that was the last really large and successful account that was in the agency, because there was a general recession at the time.
Right.
So I stayed with Mason, and then at some point I jumped from the agency to Mason directly, and I did their advertising for I think it was 9 years. And so my retirement, there was a point when I felt there were people over my shoulder that really wanted my position and were undermining me. I've been done in politically a few times. I'm proud to say I've never had much of a political sense. I don't really get caught up in that stuff. And any environment is potential political battlefield if the right conditions arise.
Right.
So I could see right away that my boss, who basically, he and I were partners and collaborators in creating Hubert W.B. Mason, he was ready to sort of move to the next level and have somebody that was working for his company as a salesman basically take on larger responsibilities. And I had groomed this fellow who had a great sense of humor as my, I didn't know it, I was grooming him as my replacement. But I retired from Mason. If you go to my website, there's a great tribute that they paid to me during their annual meeting that I have on the site.
That's great.
So I retired from Mason, and at some point just picked up starting the novel. And as I said, it took me 12 years to write. And I needed my wife, my present second wife, to really provide the extra nudge for me to finish it. Because I wasn't sure if it was worth anything, if it had enough literary value. I knew it was humorous, but I didn't know if it had enough literary value to warrant finishing the novel. And as opposed to the second novel, when I knew exactly what I wanted to achieve and pretty much achieved it. The first one, I don't think I quite saw it. In fact, my novel writing is not I don't plot out the story. I don't know what the story is until I actually experience it. It's organic that way. And so when I was writing the first one, there was a point, maybe I was a few hundred pages from the ending of it, when something in me realized that the ending was, the character was destined to have an ending that really saddened me, because there's a way in which you project yourself into the character.
Right.
And I was depressed for a couple of weeks, and I didn't know why. And then I figured it out. And it related to the fate of the first character, of the protagonist in the first novel. The second novel, I knew where I wanted it to go. I didn't know how it would end. And when I say I knew where I wanted it to go, I only mean in terms of a very sort of superficial plot that I had in mind, which was basically the telling of a story about a relationship that was about as toxic as it can be, where the wife is just this evil harridan. And I didn't know where it was going. And then at some point, the first sentence, which was the first chapter of the book, propelled the rest of the story. And if you're interested, I'll tell you that first sentence, which is the first chapter. This is a warning from the previous incarnation of your soul.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's can't get more intriguing than that.
It's very powerful, and it has the kind of energy that, as I said, could drive a book. It really can.
Now, can you describe, first of all, your geographical trajectory, career trajectory from California to Boston is very unusual because...
New York to Boston.
Oh, New York to Boston. I thought it was California because you
I went out there when I was 18 for a couple of months. But
okay, okay, all right. So even New York to Boston, that's more unusual because New York is always thought to be the place for advertising, the place for all that kind of stuff, all types of writing.
Right.
People rarely come to Boston for that stuff. So how come
I grew up in the Bronx? The Bronx is famous for having writers. I think William Styron might have been from the Bronx, or maybe he was from the South.
A lot of the writers from your show of shows were from Brooklyn.
Right. Irwin Shaw too was from the Bronx.
Yeah.
But I was this rare creature. I hated the Bronx. My particular ethos is I like to be where I can see trees. I like to be where I can see space, where I can hear birds rather than cars. And the Bronx to me was always an unpleasant environment. And I got to see that because every summer my family would go away to the Catskill Mountains.
Okay.
And to me, that's when I came alive. So when I was 19, my father got a promotion in John Hancock, and the whole family moved up here. I transferred to BU. I had been at Bronx Community College. So I was just fortunate to have, been powered up here.
What about the difference between self-publishing with your first novel and getting an actual publisher in the second? Which experience would you recommend to people, and how were those both for you?
Well, good question. My sense of self-publishing is that it has changed dramatically since I self-published my first two books. Mm-hmm. A good friend, after reading Or So It Seems, who's a businessman, suggested that I treat it like a business and I create a budget. And he suggested $15,000. I probably spent $20,000 on trying to get that. And I probably spent $20,000 for maybe 400 to 500 readers. So it wasn't a particularly good investment. Now I know that there are other opportunities for self-publishing to help promote it better. But I didn't feel particularly like I was dealing with the issue of money. I was dealing with the issue of readership. I wanted my book to have a wider readership. And I think that'll ultimately translate down the line to the previous books. But so I said to myself, I want to get a real publisher to accept this. There's a certain validity or validation that comes from having somebody say, yeah, that's good enough for me to invest some money in it. And I'm feeling very pumped right now, I have to say.
Now, they must be doing all kinds of social media with it and using all the modern day cyber promotions, right?
Well, they're very interesting. They're a small independent publisher. However, they have a devoted following. The publisher, basically, it's noir and crime thrillers and things of that sort. But he publishes whatever the hell he wants, and he calls it noir if he wants to. They're calling mine a karmic crime story. Mm-hmm. But I think he totally advertises and markets on Twitter. I've been on Twitter a few months because that's where he is and that's where the other authors are. Yeah. And I've gotten to know some of the other authors, and that's been, as I said, finding colleagues at my level or better than my level has been very exciting.
Right.
And I've been accepted in a way that it's kind of shocking with the book not even out yet. He had been telling them about my book, interestingly enough, and he wrote a wonderful, I'll buy it myself just because it's such a great write-up.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, so he's found his way of making it work. A lot of independents are struggling now, as are a lot of any kind of business you can look at is struggling, except for Amazon. And it's mostly, I think, completely on Twitter, interestingly.
So this is your fourth book then?
Third
book, okay.
Or So It Seems, How to Train a Rock, and now Sojourner.
Okay, that's great. And any plans for future books?
I want to have a trilogy. Yeah. The first book, or so it seems, and Sojourner both are kind of projections of a school of self-development I've called the Seekers for Truth. So I want a third in that series, and I want to, I'll call it a trilogy, and it may be a sequel to Sojourner. I'm not sure yet, but and after that, if the universe keeps me going, I'll just keep going.
Right.
Because it's the nice thing about being a writer, Leonard. You need a lot more assistance than I do in terms of getting whatever I have to get out. You've got to have people helping you hold the lighting and whatnot.
Right.
So I can do writing anywhere,
Right.
and I can just keep myself focused. The biggest issue for someone of my age and someone at this point in the career, I believe, is keeping productive. Not busy, but productive.
Oh, there's a big difference between busy and productive,
Right.
I write myself, and I've been writing my book for 12 years, believe it or not.
Sure, I believe it.
It's a science fiction book. And so what would you tell somebody like me who wants to get it out there? Which direction should I go, having never really finished one before?
Well, I would tell you, and I think I've learned this through doing two. I couldn't have answered the question this way after having only done one. I would tell you that you inside, if the book is not something that you're trying to adhere to an outline or somebody else's idea of what you should be doing, or trying to copy somebody else, but if it's really organically from you, I would just say you've got to listen to yourself and you got to let it happen, and you don't worry about the fact that you don't know where you're going, because that's a good sign.
Right.
Because when you know where you're going, you impose things on it, and it's not good.
Well, it's funny because I've read a lot. I always get Writer's Digest and The Writer, and I read all kinds of articles on writing. And so I had a little outline when I began the book, but every outline that I make, I blaze right through it. It's kind of a security blanket for me to have it, but I like violating it all the time. I always violate it.
Yeah.
And it works out better. If anything, mine is probably a monstrosity because I have way too many characters. It's kind of an epic, and I would, if I had to start over again, I would have started with a simpler thing. But that's what I want to do,
You can always cut back. I would never worry about having too much.
Yeah.
Maybe people will argue with me about this, but I think the writer inside knows where he or she wants to go.
Right.
And don't worry about overwriting. The fact of the matter is you can always edit, you can always clean it up.
That's true. That's true.
And if there's a really good book in the middle of all that, that's great. And allow yourself to find it.
I love doing it. Being a teacher, there's a lot of pressure and always writing lesson plans and stuff like that. And right now I'm taking a graduate course. Right before my interview with you, I was in a graduate course, and just it's freeing, and just no matter how tired I am, if I can sit down and start writing my book, it all goes away. All that burden goes away for the time that I'm doing it.
Yeah, I've had periods where I am so compelled to work on the book, and lots of periods where I don't have that at all.
Yeah.
But once you get that sense of compulsion about it, it's just thrilling. When everything is clicking and you find yourself. I'll tell you, my first novel, I had this experience where I had thought I had finished it, and maybe that's 8 years into it, and I sent it out to a woman who was an agent, who was related to somebody in church, so she did the favor of reading it and looking at it, and she sent back a simple direction. She said it needed more narrative tension. And I knew exactly what she meant. I had written this linear story about a guy going through a divorce, which quite honestly was probably as dull as dishwater. So I said to myself, okay, what I'm going to do, there's a climax where everything kind of happens. I'm going to take that climax and I'm going to put it at the front of the book. And then I'll just sort of allow things to go from there.
Right. Well, rewriting is immensely valuable.
But what happened is that when I sat down to do that, all of a sudden, all this stuff that had nothing to do with the novel as I saw it came in. The Seekers for Truth, a Hindu character called the Bapu Charya, who became basically the heart and soul of the novel. Um, and I got scared, sick. I just was sick. I was so afraid of going any further into the novel that I had written and changing it, that I made sure I copied what I had. And then I said, well, all right, let's see where you take me.
Yeah.
And
I mean, what do you use? Do you use Microsoft or you use Google Docs? What do you use?
I use Microsoft Word. I'm very, I'm not smart enough to know if one is better than the other. I grew up using Microsoft Word, so I use it.
Yeah. Well, they changed, like other applications. You can't install a DVD anymore. You have to keep subscribing, which is like a terrible thing to do to people.
Oh, I know.
Think,
it's ridiculous.
So Google Docs is still free. I do everything on there. And I've written other things, collaborating with people. You can see their cursor, they can see your cursor. You can write together online. I love Google Docs.
Well, I had bought, and in fact, I had to buy it twice because it must have run out of its subscription or whatever, a thing called Scrivener.
Scrivener, yes.
And I just had a hard time understanding the the video tutorial.
Yeah.
I haven't used it yet.
It's tough, those things. I stay away from those things because, I don't know. I work too much with technology anyway.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Now, for young people, what would you tell young people on the precipice of their career? They've just graduated high school or college, and they want a career in writing. What would you tell them?
I would tell them if that's not what their calling is, they're going to have a very unpleasant experience. That's what I would tell them. Right. I think you have to allow, there's always going to be struggle. There's always going to be suffering to get where you need to go. And I think you have to accept that. Yeah. If I hadn't had the patience to spend all that time with a novel that I didn't necessarily believe in for the first 8 or 9 years that I was writing it,
right?
It's a spiritual process. That's what I would say. And that being such, you can't necessarily guide it. You have to be guided by it.
So you seem like a person of faith, if that's a fair assessment. Where does that come from? The faith that I have is not religious faith. Okay. It's spiritual faith. Okay. I have a sense of how the world works that people don't ordinarily have. Mm-hmm. For instance, right now, I created a term for a process that I observed in nature, in life, where things start to devolve, fall apart. Mm-hmm. And when that's happening, it's really sort of a karmic destiny thing. And I call it a karmic gravitational slide. Right now, I see Trump going through exactly a karmic gravitational slide, which means that every time you try to correct yourself, you just make it worse. That's just part of the process. No way out of it.
Well, let's hope he's going to make it worse. So my things that I follow relate to clues or cues that I get that show me that I'm moving in the right direction. When I try to advise somebody, I would never tell them, I know what you should do, and you could write something and prove it to me. Yeah. It's got to be from the spirit. It's inside each of us. I wrote a video that I did called "To You Who Are Different," and I had high school kids. I filmed it, and I had high school kids performing or just really kind of acting out or reciting the piece.
Right.
And it starts off that each of us is born with a unique personality and a call to be something special. And when I saw the kids say that, I knew that I was right. And nobody ever questioned it. It's interesting to me. And these were young kids. They were mostly Black or Hispanic. They were in my sister's school in Randolph. Mm-hmm. And, quite honestly, they're going to have a lot more struggle than I would ever to find their calling.
Right. That sounds like you should write a book about spirituality if you haven't already.
Well, I think my novels do that as much as I have any interest in doing it.
Okay.
The thing that I really care about when I'm writing the novel is that it has to be fun.
Right.
If you read Sojourner, I think it's just a blast. I've got the Beatles in there in ways that you wouldn't expect. And in fact, there's something related to the Beatles that actually becomes a prime motivational factor for two of the characters.
It's so
just
funny.
fun.
I have the Beatles in my novel too.
There you go.
It's really strange. Anyway, thank you very much, Paul, for being with me here on What Do You Want to Do? And I think you'll inspire a lot of people, and hopefully you'll find a new audience when my podcast finds a new audience.
Okay, I look forward to it. I look forward to seeing or hearing this whenever you get it together.
Yeah, I'm building up 10 episodes first before I release them all week by week. And I'm going to use these social media lessons that I've tried to teach myself and see how far it can go. That's
well,
why
best
I
of luck.
build them up. Thank you very much, Paul. And good luck. And can I get your novel? Where can people get all of your novels?
Well,
Amazon?
if you go on Amazon, you'll find two of the books. You'll find Or So It Seems and How to Train a Rock. And Souljourner will be sold directly from Fahrenheit Press, but it will also be on Amazon when it comes out.
Great.
So, yeah.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you, Paul. And hopefully we'll last long enough for you to come back on here.
All right. Thank you, Leonard. This has been fun.
Take care.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. You can get Paul Stephenstone's 3 novels, Or So It Seems, How to Train a Rock, and Souljourner on Amazon.com. And remember, Souljourner can also be found on Fahrenheit Press. Please join us again next week on What Do You Want to Do with another great guest. And until then, what do you want to do?